She was a gentle, kind-hearted woman, beloved by everyone around her. Trusted and full of dreams, she never imagined the nurse assigned to care for her would betray her. In a cruel twist, she was killed in her own home, leaving behind sorrow, unanswered questions, and a restless spirit that refused to rest. If you enjoy African folk stories filled with mysteries, betrayal, and justice, subscribe, like, and comment where you are watching from, and join us as the story begins. The city of Lagos shimmered beneath neon lights, buzzing with traffic, ambition, and restless dreams. Skyscrapers towered over crowded streets, where wealth and poverty existed side by side like silent rivals. High above the chaos stood the luxurious Okoye mansion, a fortress of glass, marble, and power. Yet inside, the air was heavy with sorrow, fear, and an approaching sense of doom. Chief Chinedu Okoye, a billionaire known across Nigeria for his empire in oil, real estate, and technology, paced the polished floor like a broken man. His wealth could buy almost anything: exotic cars, private jets, politicians' loyalty, but it could not buy time. His beloved wife, Ifeoma Okoye, once admired for her elegance and kindness, lay weak and fading in a private hospital wing built inside their mansion. Ifeoma's breath trembled like a candle struggling against the wind. Her once glowing skin had grown pale, and her eyes, once full of warmth and life, now carried both pain and quiet resignation. She had been more than a billionaire's wife. She was a symbol of grace, charity, and love in the city. Her illness had shocked the elite social circle, leaving society whispering prayers and rumors in equal measure. Standing beside her bed was the newly hired caregiver, Nurse Dorcas Adebayo, a woman with a gentle smile and a voice as soft as silk. She appeared devoted, attentive, and compassionate, always reassuring Chief Okoye that his wife was in safe hands. But beneath her white uniform and polished manners lay a heart riddled with envy, greed, and dangerous ambition, a secret no one in the mansion suspected. As rain drummed against the windows and distant thunder echoed through the night sky, an unseen presence seemed to hover over the room. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than ever, counting down toward a destiny no one could yet comprehend. In that moment, love, wealth, betrayal, and the supernatural began to weave a tragic story, one that would haunt the city long after the last heartbeat faded. Nurse Dorcas Adebayo walked through the grand halls of the Okoye mansion as though she already belonged there. Every chandelier, every marble pillar, every priceless painting whispered luxury, a world she had never known but desperately craved. Her shoes echoed softly on the glossy floors, yet inside her mind, a storm of envy, ambition, and resentment raged uncontrollably. She had grown up in the harsh corners of Lagos, where dreams were crushed daily by hunger, hardship, and hopelessness. Watching wealthy families on television and social media had planted a seed of bitterness in her heart. Now, standing inside one of the richest homes in Nigeria, that seed bloomed into obsession. She stared at Ifeoma's jewelry, her designer handbags, her luxurious wardrobe, all symbols of a life Dorcas believed she deserved more. By Ifeoma's bedside, Dorcas pretended kindness with flawless precision. She adjusted pillows gently, wiped sweat from the sick woman's forehead, and spoke in soothing tones that convinced everyone she was compassionate and trustworthy. But when no one was watching, her gaze hardened into something cold, calculating, and dangerous. She watched the fragile woman like a predator watches wounded prey. Late at night, while the mansion slept and the city outside hummed with distant sirens and traffic, Dorcas lingered alone in Ifeoma's room. The glow of streetlights filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Dorcas whispered to herself about fate, about destiny, about how life had been unfair to her, and how it was time to take what the world had denied her. She imagined herself wearing Ifeoma's gowns, attending high-class events, stepping into luxury cars, and living as the queen of the Okoye Empire. The thought intoxicated her. In her mind, Ifeoma was not a patient anymore. She was an obstacle standing between Dorcas and the life she wanted. As thunder rumbled again in the distance, Dorcas turned toward the sleeping woman with a slow, unreadable smile. In that silent moment, the line between caregiver and villain disappeared, and though no one could yet see it, The shadow of betrayal had already entered the Okoye mansion, ready to rewrite the fate of everyone inside. The morning sun rose over Lagos like a reluctant witness to sorrow, painting the skyline in shades of gold and gray. Inside the Okoye mansion, the scent of disinfectant mixed with expensive perfume, creating an unsettling contrast between luxury and illness. Servants moved quietly, speaking in hushed voices, afraid that even sound might disturb the fragile balance of life, holding Ifeoma Okoye to this world. Ifeoma opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the soft glow of the room. Memories flooded her mind: glamorous charity galas, warm laughter shared with her husband, and her countless acts of kindness to the less privileged in the city. She had been a woman admired not only for her beauty but also for her generosity, the kind of rich woman who uplifted street children and supported struggling families across Lagos. Chief Chinedu Okoye sat beside her bed, holding her weak hand as though letting go might cause her to vanish. His strong billionaire image crumbled in her presence. Here, he was not a powerful tycoon, but a frightened husband clinging to love. His voice trembled as he reassures her that she would recover, even though fear lingered in his eyes like a silent scream. Nurse Dorcas hovered nearby with professional grace, carefully monitoring every breath, every movement, every change in Ifeoma's condition. She nodded sympathetically, offering gentle words meant to calm the worried husband. Yet behind her composed expression, her heart beat with dangerous excitement, as though she were standing at the edge of a plan she had already chosen to carry out. As the day progressed, news of Ifeoma's declining health spread across elite social circles and business networks. Politicians, wealthy friends, and media figures whispered prayers while secretly speculating about what might happen if the billionaire's wife did not survive. The Okoye family name carried power, and where power existed, opportunists and vultures were never far away. By evening, Ifeoma drifted into another fragile sleep, unaware that unseen forces were closing in around her. Outside, Lagos traffic roared endlessly, neon signs flickered, and nightlife bloomed with energy. But within the mansion, an invisible countdown had begun. Somewhere between compassion and cruelty, love and greed, fate was preparing a heartbreaking twist that would change every life connected to the Okoye Empire. Night fell over Lagos with a heavy, restless mood, and the Okoye mansion seemed to hold its breath as darkness crept into every corner. Streetlights glowed outside like distant stars, while the soft hum of generators and passing cars created an eerie urban soundtrack. Inside the mansion, the usual warmth of luxury felt colder, as though something unseen had begun to haunt the atmosphere. Chief Chinedu Okoye barely slept. He moved from room to room, replaying memories of happier days, laughing with Ifeoma on their balcony, dancing with her at charity galas, and planning futures that now felt heartbreakingly uncertain. The empire he built with ambition and discipline suddenly felt meaningless when weighed against the possibility of losing the woman he loved. In Ifeoma's room, machines beeped softly, measuring the fragile rhythm of her fading strength. Her breathing grew weaker, and her dreams became filled with flashes of her past: the orphanage she funded, the women she empowered, the strangers who once thanked her with tears in their eyes. Somewhere deep in her spirit, she sensed a looming presence, like a cold hand reaching toward her fate. Nurse Dorcas Adebayo watched closely, her expression carefully masked with sympathy. She spoke kindly to the servants, reassured the worried billionaire, and maintained her reputation as a devoted caregiver. Yet when alone, she stared at Ifeoma with a chilling detachment, her mind swirling with ambition, resentment, and the intoxicating thought of replacing her. At midnight, thunder rolled across the city again, rattling the mansion windows as rain poured down in heavy sheets. Lightning flashed briefly, illuminating Dorcas standing beside Ifeoma's bed, adjusting in foredrip with calculated precision. The moment felt suspended in time, as if destiny itself had paused to observe a turning point. Deep within the mansion, a strange sensation began to rise, a tension that felt supernatural, as though unseen eyes were watching. The air grew heavier, colder, and filled with whispers no one could quite explain. Somewhere in the shadows, a tragic bond was forming between life and death, a bond that would soon unleash grief, vengeance, and a restless spirit that refused to fade. The early hours of the morning wrapped Lagos in a pale, uncertain glow, as if the city itself sensed that something irreversible was about to happen. Inside the Okoye mansion, silence reigned like a solemn judge, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of medical machines and the distant echo of traffic drifting through glass walls. Ifeoma Okoye stirred weakly in her bed, her chest rising and falling with visible effort. Her lips trembled as she whispered Chief Chinedu's name, calling him not as a billionaire, but as a husband, a companion, and the love of her life. When he rushed to her side, tears flooded his eyes, and he knelt beside her like a man pleading with fate. She smiled faintly at him, a fragile, heartbreaking smile filled with gratitude, love, and quiet acceptance. With trembling hands, she spoke about the orphan children she wanted him to continue supporting, the scholarships she dreamed of funding, and the charity foundation she hoped would live on even after she was gone. Every word carried the weight of a farewell neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Nurse Dorcas stood nearby, observing every breath with professional calm, yet her heart beat faster with anticipation. She adjusted the drip, checked vital signs, and assured Chinedu that Ifeoma would be fine. But there was something colder now in her gaze, something dangerously resolved. The room felt thick with tension, as though unseen forces were gathering to witness the end of a chapter. As Ifeoma's strength waned, memories flooded her mind. Her childhood dreams, her rise into high society, her love story with Chinedu, and her passion for helping the less fortunate in Lagos. Her spirit clung to hope, but her body betrayed her, slipping further toward the edge of life with every passing minute. Suddenly, her breathing faltered. The machines beeped erratically, and panic rippled through the room. Chinedu held her hand desperately, calling her name again and again, begging her to stay. In her final conscious moment, Ifeoma turned her eyes toward Nurse Dorcas. And for a split second, a strange flicker of fear crossed her expression, as though she sensed something deeply wrong. Then her chest fell silent. A haunting stillness filled the room, broken only by Chinedu's anguished cry as he realized his wife was gone. Outside, thunder cracked across the Lagos sky, and rain intensified as though the heavens themselves were mourning. But while the world believed Ifeoma Okoye had died peacefully, an unseen truth lingered in the shadows. Her story was not over, and her spirit would not rest. The mansion felt empty now, yet the air was thicker than ever. The laughter and warmth that once filled the Okoye home had vanished, replaced by an oppressive stillness that pressed against every wall. Rain pounded on the windows like relentless sorrow, washing the city streets in a silver haze. Inside, Chief Chinedu Okoye sat slumped beside the bed where Ifeoma had drawn her last breath, his eyes hollow and bloodshot, his hands clutching the cold sheets as if trying to hold her spirit back from leaving forever. Servants whispered among themselves, their voices trembling with fear. They spoke of strange sounds in the mansion, doors creaking despite being locked, faint sighs echoing in empty corridors, shadows flickering where no light shone. But Chinedu, overwhelmed by grief, barely noticed. All he could feel was the absence of Ifeoma and the unbearable weight of a life that had lost its center. Meanwhile, in the quiet corners of the house, Nurse Dorcas Adebayo moved with a calculated serenity. She had completed her nightly rounds, adjusting machines and checking vital signs that no longer registered life. To the outside world, she remained the dutiful caregiver, but inside, a dangerous thrill surged through her. She had secured her position, taken the first step toward the luxurious life she desired, and believed no one would ever uncover her intentions. Yet something subtle, a chill in the air, a fleeting shadow at the corner of her eye, made her heart hesitate, just for a moment. By midnight, the mansion seemed alive with a presence no one could explain. The lights flickered, the ceiling fan swayed without wind, and a low, almost mournful whisper echoed through the halls. Chinedu shivered, sensing a cold weight brush past him, but when he turned, no one was there. The city outside continued its restless hum, oblivious to the supernatural storm gathering within one of its wealthiest estates. And then it happened, the first undeniable sign of Ifeoma's unrest. In the room where she had passed, a faint glow began to shimmer over the bed. It was soft, almost imperceptible at first, but steadily grew brighter, illuminating the shadows in strange, ethereal patterns. The sheets lifted slightly, as if caught in a gentle, invisible breeze. The air grew cold, and the smell of jasmine, Ifeoma's favorite scent, filled the room, despite no flowers being present. Chinedu and the staff froze, hearts pounding. Something, or someone, was refusing to rest. The spirit of Ifeoma had awakened, and the mansion would never be the same again. Outside Lagos, the storm continued to rage, a reflection of the chaos within. Dorcas, sensing a shift, felt an unshakable dread creep into her chest. The ambitions that had burned so brightly now flickered under a shadow she could not understand. And deep within the walls, unseen eyes watched, waited, and vowed that the betrayal would not go unanswered. The ghost of Ifeoma Okoye had returned, and the city would soon bear witness to a tale of vengeance, love, and redemption that no wealth or power could contain. The mansion seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Each hallway, each grand staircase, carried a chill that was impossible to ignore. Chief Chinedu Okoye had tried to sleep, but exhaustion had no claim over grief. He wandered from room to room, staring at the silent machines, the untouched flowers, the empty space where Ifeoma's laughter once lingered. The city outside Lagos roared as usual, but within these walls, time had slowed, as if reality itself were holding its breath. It began subtly. A whisper of silk against marble floors, a fleeting shadow at the corner of his eyes, the faint scent of jasmine wafting through corridors that had been sterilized and sealed. Chinedu froze more than once, unsure if it was fatigue or something far more ominous. His grief, raw and suffocating, made him vulnerable, yet there was a part of him that clung to the thought, she isn't gone. She can't be gone. Nurse Dorcas Adebayo was restless that night. She had expected triumph, the quiet satisfaction of removing an obstacle and stepping closer to wealth, but the mansion refused to be silent. Lights flickered as if responding to some invisible force. Machines beeped erratically, though nothing should have triggered them. Dorcas felt a prickle of unease crawling up her spine. Her ambition, once a fire she controlled, was now shadowed by a fear she didn't want to acknowledge. Something was in the house, something that did not forgive. It was then that Ngozi, the new maid recently hired from a modest part of Lagos, stepped into the scene. She had been recommended by a trusted family friend, a woman known for her integrity and quiet diligence. Unlike the other staff, Ngozi possessed a presence of calm and warmth. She moved through the mansion with respect, eyes bright but gentle, her demeanor like a soft light cutting through the oppressive shadows. Even at midnight, when whispers and cold drafts haunted the halls, she carried herself with courage that surprised even Chinedu. As Ngozi passed by Ifeoma's room, she froze. There was a sudden drop in temperature so intense that her breath formed visible mist in the air. The curtains swayed though the windows were shut, and for the first time, Ngozi felt the unmistakable weight of someone's presence, a presence full of sorrow, pain, and unfinished business. A voice, barely audible, whispered her name, Ngozi, in a tone that carried both warning and plea. She took a cautious step closer, her heart pounding. Though terrified, she sensed purity in the spirit's call. Unlike Dorcas, whose heart was heavy with deceit, Ngozi's intentions were honest, guided by compassion and respect. Chinedu entered quietly, drawn by the soft glow emanating from the room. He had avoided the mansion's upper floors since Ifeoma's passing, fearful of encountering the reminders of love lost. Now, the ethereal light illuminated her room, casting the billionaire in a way he had never been seen. A man stripped of power, wealth, and pride, only his grief and longing left visible. Ngozi turned to him, her eyes wide but steady, and said simply, "Sir, she is not at peace. We must listen." Dorcas, sensing something beyond her control, retreated into the shadows. Her plan had relied on secrecy, manipulation, and the quiet passing of time. But now, confronted by the palpable presence of Ifeoma's spirit and the unexpected bravery of a young maid, her confidence faltered. Something far larger than greed had entered the mansion, a force of justice, love, and wrath that would not be silenced. Outside, Lagos slept unaware. Rain streaked the city streets, neon signs flickered, and the distant wail of car horns echoed like a lament. Inside, The Okoye mansion had become a crucible where love, betrayal, and vengeance were poised to collide. Ngozi, standing in the cold glow of Ifeoma's restless spirit, felt a determination rise in her heart. She did not know yet how she would face the darkness, but she instinctively understood one truth. The ghost would guide the living, and the guilty would not escape. The mansion's grand halls felt alive with whispers that carried through every corridor, echoing against the marble walls like a ghostly symphony. Rain pummeled the city outside, cascading down the glass panes of the towering Okoye estate, while thunder rolled overhead, rattling chandeliers and shaking the floorboards. Inside, silence was no longer empty. It was pregnant with something unseen, restless, and unforgiving. Nurse Dorcas Adebayo had spent the night pacing her small staff quarters, her usually steady hands trembling as shadows seemed to twist and stretch along the walls. She thought of Ifeoma, the fragile, sick woman she had promised to care for, and a dark part of her mind whispered, "You took her place. You are next." At first, she laughed nervously, convincing herself it was grief and fear playing tricks. But the unease grew unbearable. Doors slammed softly on their own. Lights flickered. Cold drafts blew down halls with no open windows. Something in the mansion did not forgive. Meanwhile, Ngozi, the young maid, moved with quiet purpose. She had spent years navigating the streets and slums of Lagos, surviving with courage and hope, but nothing had prepared her for this. In Ifeoma's room, the faint glow of her spirit lingered, illuminating the space in a pale, otherworldly light. Ngozi felt it brush against her skin like a gentle hand, sorrowful yet pleading. Her heart raced, but she did not run. Instead, she knelt by the bed and whispered softly, "I hear you, ma'am. I will help you find peace." At that moment, Chief Chinedu Okoye entered, drawn by an unexplainable pull toward the room. The billionaire, usually so commanding, appeared smaller in the glow of the ghostly presence, stripped of his power, wealth, and pride. He fell to his knees beside Ngozi, gripping her hand, feeling a strange comfort in her steadiness. He whispered brokenly, "Ifeoma, if you can hear me, forgive me." A chill swept through the room as the ghost seemed to respond, moving toward Chinedu, illuminating his grief, and settling on the space between him and Ngozi, as though acknowledging her role as a bridge between the living and the dead. Dorcas, drawn by the glow and unable to resist, stepped closer into the hallway. She saw the light, saw the two humans kneeling in awe and fear, and felt a cold dread grip her heart. Then, without warning, the apparition of Ifeoma appeared before her, unmistakable, radiant, and terrifying. Her eyes, filled with sorrow and fury, bore into Dorcas, freezing her in place. Dorcas's heart raced, sweat ran down her temples, and she stumbled backward, screaming in fear. For the first time, she realized that money, ambition, and deceit could not shield her from justice. The spirit's presence was undeniable, and her guilt had summoned it. Outside, the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the cityscape in blinding flashes. Lagos seemed unaware of the supernatural drama unfolding within the walls of the Okoye mansion. But inside, the rules of the natural world had shifted. The ghost hovered over Dorcas, her anger palpable, and the mansion itself seemed to lean toward the righteous, toward Chinedu and Ngozi. This night marked the turning point. Fear and remorse for the guilty, hope and guidance for the innocent, and the beginning of a path that would ultimately lead to justice, healing, and an unexpected love that could blossom even amidst the grief and darkness. The mansion had transformed into a labyrinth of fear and anticipation. The once pristine halls now seemed alive with shadows that twisted and danced in the glow of flickering lights. Rain lashed against the windows with a violent rhythm, and distant thunder rattled the ceilings, each boom resonating like a warning. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with grief, anger, and a presence no one could ignore. Nurse Dorcas Adebayo stumbled backward as the apparition of Ifeoma materialized before her in the dim light of the hallway. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and her breath came in sharp, terrified gasps. The ghost's eyes bore into her with a sorrowful fury that pierced through every layer of deceit and greed she had carefully constructed. The walls themselves seemed to whisper, carrying Iphioma's unfulfilled desires like a chorus of justice. Dorcas's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she realized there was no hiding, no escaping. She was entirely exposed. Meanwhile, in the room where the spirit first appeared, Ngozi and Chinedu knelt together, holding hands as if the physical touch could anchor them in the storm swirling around them. The soft, ethereal glow bathed their faces, illuminating the raw grief and exhaustion that clung to both. Ngozi's presence was calming, grounding Chinedu in a way he had not felt since the loss of his beloved wife. The ghost lingered, not in vengeance against them, but as a guide, an invisible hand pointing toward justice, protection, and eventual peace. Dorcas, driven by fear, tried to flee through the mansion's corridors, but the layout seemed to shift beneath her feet. Rooms appeared where none had existed before, doors slammed in her face, and the very air seemed to resist her. Every attempt to escape only brought her closer to the ghost, whose presence grew heavier, colder, and more undeniable with every heartbeat. She screamed, her voice echoing through halls, but the mansion seemed to absorb her terror, amplifying it, and reflecting it back into her own soul. Chinedu watched, a mix of fear and awe coursing through him, as Ngozi whispered gently, "Sir, she is showing us what happened. We must trust her." In that moment, he felt a shift, not only in the mansion, but within himself. The walls of grief and despair that had imprisoned him began to crumble, replaced with a sense of purpose. Together, he and Ngozi were no longer helpless victims of loss. They were instruments of justice, guided by the spirit that had once been his wife. The night wore on, and the mansion became a theater of supernatural inevitability. Dorcas's panic escalated into near hysteria as Iphioma's spirit confronted her directly, a radiant figure cloaked in sorrow and righteousness. Every lie Dorcas had spoken, every ill intention she had harbored, was reflected back upon her in a spectral mirror of guilt. Meanwhile, Chinedu and Ngozi remained steadfast, their courage and empathy shielding them from the fear that now gripped the guilty. In that moment, the mansion no longer belonged to the living alone. It belonged equally to the spirit of a woman who demanded justice, and to those who had the courage to honor her. By the first light of dawn, the storm outside began to ease. Rain softened to a drizzle, and lightning retreated into distant clouds. Dorcas, pale and trembling, collapsed to the marble floor, her mind shattered by the unrelenting presence of the supernatural. Chinedu, kneeling beside Ngozi, finally allowed himself a long, shuddering breath. In the soft glow of the rising sun, the mansion seemed to exhale as though a balance had been restored, one that would guide the living, punish the guilty, and eventually allow a new love to flourish amidst the ruins of grief. The mansion was quiet now, but not peaceful. The storm had eased outside, leaving the city streets slick with rain, reflecting the neon lights of Lagos like broken mirrors. Inside, the air was still heavy with the remnants of the supernatural night. Shadows lingered in corners, whispering secrets only the heart of the guilty could hear. Dorcas Adebayo lay sprawled on the cold marble floor, her hands clutching at her chest as though trying to hold back the fear that had taken root. Her ambitions, her greed, her lust for wealth, all of it had been stripped away by the presence of a woman who refused to be silenced. Chinedu approached cautiously, his eyes wide with both awe and lingering grief. He had seen many things in his life: power struggles, corporate betrayals, and the ruthless side of human nature. But he had never seen a force so pure, so unrelenting, as the spirit of his beloved Iphioma. He glanced at Ngozi, who stood quietly beside him, her posture calm, her expression resolute. Unlike Dorcas, she had faced the ghost not with fear alone, but with compassion. Chinedu felt a spark of relief. Here, perhaps, was someone who could help him navigate the pain and the chaos. Ngozi stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "Sir, she wants us to know the truth. She wants Dorcas to face what she's done, but she also wants justice and peace for those who loved her. We must listen." Chinedu nodded, his fingers brushing against hers instinctively, finding warmth and steadiness in her touch. For the first time since Iphioma's death, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that even amidst grief, life could still offer protection, love, and guidance. Dorcas struggled to stand, her body shaking violently as she faced the apparition of Iphioma floating above the room. The ghost's eyes were filled with sorrow and rage, a perfect mirror of the pain Dorcas had inflicted. Her voice, ethereal and echoing, resonated in the air. You thought you could take what was not yours. You thought no one would notice. But greed is visible to the soul, and lies cannot hide from the truth. Dorcas collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Her carefully constructed world of deceit had crumbled in a single night, and the weight of her conscience now pressed down like stone. Chinedu watched silently, unable to fully process the surreal confrontation between the living and the dead. Yet, as he glanced at Ngozi, her courage and empathy seemed to shine through the darkness. Together, they approached Dorcas cautiously, not with judgment, but with recognition that the living must continue to act while the dead could only guide. Chinedu's hand rested lightly on Ngozi's shoulder, and a silent understanding passed between them. In this house of grief and justice, compassion and courage would be the tools to heal wounds that money and power could never touch. The glow of Iphioma's presence softened slightly, bathing the mansion in a warm, comforting light that contrasted sharply with the cold fear Dorcas had felt moments ago. It was a signal, Chinedu realized, that the spirit's wrath was not endless. It was purposeful. It had come to reveal truth, ensure justice, and prepare the living for the life that must continue beyond loss. He looked at Ngozi again, and in that gaze, there was recognition. She was not just a maid or a witness. She was a lifeline in the storm of grief, a steady hand that could guide him through the aftermath of loss and toward the possibility of new beginnings. Outside, Lagos glimmered under the early morning sun breaking through storm clouds. Traffic resumed, vendors called out their wares, and the city's heartbeat returned to normal. But inside the mansion, everything had changed. Dorcas's guilt would haunt her forever. The spirit of Iphioma had made her presence known and her justice unavoidable. And for Chinedu and Ngozi, the night's events had forged a bond, subtle but undeniable, a connection born of shared fear, empathy, and the guidance of a love that transcended death itself. The mansion remained heavy with silence, yet an undeniable energy pulsed through its walls, thick with sorrow, rage, and the whispers of the unseen. Outside, Lagos was awakening, a city indifferent to the supernatural drama unfolding above its bustling streets. Inside the Okoye estate, however, nothing remained ordinary. Every marble surface reflected shadows that moved without wind. Every corridor carried a lingering chill that clung to the skin. The mansion had become a theater for justice, and its audience included the guilty, the grieving, and the innocent alike. Nurse Dorcas Adebayo crouched on the cold floor of the main hall, her hands pressed against her ears as though trying to block out the ethereal murmurs. The soft, mournful voice of Iphioma seemed to echo from every direction, repeating phrases Dorcas could neither ignore nor fully understand. You cannot hide. You cannot escape. Justice is coming. Sweat poured down Dorcas's face as the realization struck her. Her schemes, her ambition, her greed, all had failed to shield her. Fear, raw and unrelenting, had consumed her entirely. In the room nearby, Chinedu and Ngozi remained calm, yet their senses were fully alive to the mansion's strange vibrations. Chinedu's grief, though still deep, had begun to intertwine with awe and relief. He glanced at Ngozi, who met his gaze with quiet determination, her hand brushing against his in reassurance. A subtle warmth spread between them, born of shared fear, mutual respect, and the understanding that in this storm of grief and vengeance, they were allies. The glow of Iphioma's spirit illuminated their faces as though blessing their courage and their hearts. Dorcas tried to flee again, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. Doors slammed shut before she could pass. Hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, and the ghostly voice of Iphioma grew louder, now mingled with faint, almost invisible hands brushing her shoulders, restraining her not violently, but with a presence that would not allow escape. The walls themselves seemed to close in, each reflection in the polished marble revealing her fear and guilt with unrelenting clarity. She fell to her knees repeatedly, begging for mercy, realizing for the first time that no wealth, no charm, no deceit could undo the wrong she had done. Chinedu and Ngozi approached the trembling woman cautiously. "Dorcas," Ngozi said softly, her voice steady and calm despite the supernatural tension. What you did cannot be undone, but you must face the consequences. It is not just punishment, it is truth finding its path. Chinidu's voice joined hers, calm yet filled with the quiet power of authority. There is no hiding here. Only honesty, only acceptance, and only the courage to admit your wrongs. Dorcas shuddered, unable to speak. Every lie she had ever told reflected back at her in Ifeoma's luminous gaze. Above them, Ifeoma's ghost hovered, her presence radiating both sorrow and justice. It was not vengeance born of cruelty, but a moral reckoning, a reminder that the heart that harms cannot escape the weight of its choices. The glow around her softened as she turned her gaze toward Chinidu and Ngozi, acknowledging their empathy, courage, and willingness to stand for what was right. A sense of peace began to settle into the mansion, though Dorcas remained paralyzed by terror, forced to reckon with the consequences of her ambition. By midday, the storm had fully cleared, leaving the mansion washed in sunlight. Outside, the city continued unaware, a sea of motion and noise, but inside, the events of the past night had irrevocably changed the Okoye household. Dorcas sat trembling, broken in spirit, while Chinidu and Ngozi stood together, connected by a bond forged in grief, fear, and the guiding hand of a love that transcended death. Ifeoma's presence lingered for a moment longer, a quiet blessing for those who had remained true, before fading into the light, her unfinished business acknowledged, her soul finally at peace. In that moment, Chinidu realized something profound. Grief could teach courage, tragedy could inspire love, and even amidst betrayal and loss, the heart could find someone who understood it entirely. He glanced at Ngozi, whose eyes met his with unwavering warmth, and for the first time since Ifeoma's passing, a faint smile broke across his face, one that held the promise of healing hope and perhaps the beginning of a new chapter. By late morning, sunlight streamed into the grand halls of the Okoye mansion, highlighting the glittering surfaces that had once reflected nothing but wealth and power. Yet the light could not mask the tension that still lingered. Dorcas Adebayo sat stiffly on a gilded chair in the main hall, her hands trembling as she tried to regain composure. She had been confronted by the spirit of Ifeoma Okoye, felt the unrelenting force of truth pressing down upon her, and now the reality of her actions was suffocating. The mansion's servants, who had witnessed fragments of the supernatural events, looked on in a mix of fear, awe, and relief. Chief Chinidu Okoye paced slowly in front of her, his suit slightly rumpled, hair mussed, and eyes still red from sleepless nights of grief. For the first time in weeks, he felt a measure of control returning, not through wealth or authority, but through justice. He spoke in a low, steady voice. Dorcas, the life you tried to steal is gone. The trust you betrayed cannot be undone. But you must understand the consequences. This mansion, this family, and those who loved her will not be fooled. His words were heavy, carrying the weight of authority and heartbreak combined. Ngozi remained close to Chinidu, standing tall despite the remnants of the night's terror. Her presence was calming, steadying him as he faced the aftermath of betrayal. She looked at Dorcas with eyes that were firm but not cruel, understanding that the young nurse's fear was her own punishment manifesting. "You must leave this house, Dorcas," she said softly, but every word carried the clarity of truth. "You cannot undo what has been done, and your presence only disturbs the peace that must now return to this home." Dorcas's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came. Outside, Lagos continued its relentless rhythm, unaware of the extraordinary events unfolding within the walls of the Okoye mansion. Rain had washed the streets clean, and the city shone under the morning sun, a mirror to the sense of cleansing that had begun inside. Dorcas finally rose unsteadily to her feet, her eyes haunted by the memory of Ifeoma's glowing figure and the unwavering judgment that had left her paralyzed with fear. She walked toward the front door of the mansion, each step slow, as though the weight of her guilt physically restrained her. With a final glance at Chinidu and Ngozi, she stepped into the street and disappeared into the city, a shadow of her former ambition, broken and exposed. Left alone in the great hall, Chinidu exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over him. Ngozi stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. He turned to look at her, seeing not just the young maid who had bravely faced the supernatural, but someone whose courage, integrity, and warmth had guided him through the darkest night of his life. A quiet understanding passed between them, unspoken but profound. In the midst of tragedy, they had found a connection rooted in trust, shared experience, and mutual respect. The mansion seemed to breathe again, lighter now, free of the oppressive darkness that had clung to it. The memory of Ifeoma lingered, but not as a shadow of fear. Instead, her presence seemed to bless the path forward. Chinita looked out across the cityscape from the balcony, the sun reflecting off distant glass towers, and felt a strange, tentative hope. Life had tested him, stripped him of certainty and comfort, but in the ashes of grief, he sensed that something new, and potentially beautiful, could grow. Ngozi followed his gaze, her voice soft but confident. "Sir, perhaps now, the house can truly be a home again. And perhaps you are not meant to face life's storms alone." Chinidu turned fully to her, searching her face, and for the first time since Ifeoma's passing, he allowed himself a faint smile, one that hinted at healing trust and the very first stirrings of a bond that could eventually grow into love. The mansion was no longer just a palace of wealth and power. It had become a place of reckoning, of truth, and of new beginnings. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the house, Ifeoma's spirit lingered briefly, a gentle blessing for the living before fading into the light, leaving behind peace, closure, and a world ready to embrace the possibility of happiness once more. The first week after Dorcas's departure was quiet in a way that both comforted and unnerved the mansion. The hum of machines, the shuffle of servants, and the echo of Chinidu's footsteps no longer carried the weight of fear, but a subtle tension lingered, a reminder of the sorrow and supernatural events that had reshaped the house. Every room seemed touched by Ifeoma's lingering spirit, not in haunting, but in guidance, the soft warmth of justice and love that had left a quiet blessing on those who remained. Chinidu returned to his routines cautiously. Business calls and high-level meetings awaited him. But the mansion had become more than just a home. It had become a sanctuary for reflection and recovery. He moved through it slowly, observing details he had previously ignored. The way the light fell through the windows in the early morning, the polished surfaces now reflecting life rather than shadows, and the small acts of care that Ngozi quietly performed around the house. She was no longer just the maid. She was a presence that steadied him, a silent force guiding him toward healing. Ngozi moved through her daily tasks with quiet grace, yet there was a subtle confidence now, one born from the extraordinary events she had endured. She prepared meals with care, ensured the mansion's order, and even found herself offering gentle reminders to Chinidu, not as a subordinate, but as someone invested in the well-being of both the home and its master. Each glance, each small touch of reassurance, strengthened the bond between them, a connection forged in the crucible of grief and supernatural trial. One afternoon, Chinidu found himself sitting in the sun-drenched veranda, watching Ngozi tending to the roses that Ifeoma had loved so dearly. The scent of their petals mingled with the faint aroma of jasmine, a subtle reminder of the wife he had lost, yet also a sign that life could continue, gently and with care. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Ngozi, you've done more than anyone could have expected. You've brought calm to this house, to me. I don't know how to thank you." Ngozi looked up from her work, her eyes meeting his, steady and warm, and replied softly, "You don't need to thank me, sir. You just need to live again. And let yourself trust again." Chinidu felt an unfamiliar softness in his chest, a stirring of emotions that had long been buried beneath grief and responsibility. He realized that for the first time since Ifeoma's passing, he was beginning to see the possibility of companionship, of connection not born of obligation or convenience, but of respect, trust, and shared experience. He allowed himself a small smile, hesitant but genuine, and for the first time, the mansion felt alive not with fear or sorrow, but with the quiet promise of new beginnings. As dusk fell over Lagos, painting the city in shades of gold and deep indigo, Chinidu and Ngozi shared a moment of quiet understanding on the veranda. Words were few, but the air between them was charged with a subtle intimacy. The city's distant hum seemed to fade, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and the faint scent of flowers in the air. The mansion, once a place of grief and terror, now felt like a home. A sanctuary where the past had been acknowledged, justice had been served, and the heart could finally begin to heal. Somewhere in the fading light, Chinidu realized that he was not alone. Not just because Ngozi stood beside him, but because the presence of Ifeoma's spirit had ensured that love, trust, and loyalty had guided him through the darkness. The mansion had been a crucible, and now it was ready to nurture the next chapter. One filled not with fear, but with hope, courage, and the quiet beginnings of a love that could bloom amidst the city lights. The city of Lagos buzzed faintly in the distance, its vibrant energy contrasting with the calm that now settled over the Okoye mansion. Inside, sunlight streamed through the large bay windows, glinting off the polished floors and walls, turning the house into a sanctuary of warmth and reflection. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and roses, a subtle reminder of Ifeoma's lingering presence and blessing. It was as though the mansion itself had forgiven, or perhaps guided, those who remained. Chinidu moved quietly through the halls, observing Ngozi as she went about her daily chores. She carried herself with a calm authority now, her movements graceful, confident, yet unassuming. Where before she had been a mere caretaker, she had become a stabilizing presence, someone whose compassion and integrity seemed to seep into every corner of the mansion. Chinidu watched her for a long moment, realizing that her steadiness had begun to fill the void left by grief, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. Ngozi noticed him watching and smiled softly, a small, unassuming gesture that somehow made Chinidu's chest tighten. She approached with a tray of tea, the steam curling into the sunlight, and handed him a cup without a word. He accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact was fleeting, yet it carried an unspoken reassurance, a gentle reminder that the bond they were forming was built on trust, mutual respect, and the shared experience of surviving grief and supernatural reckoning together. They sat on the veranda, overlooking the sprawling gardens that Ifeoma had tended with such care. Ngozi spoke of small, everyday matters, tending the roses, ensuring the staff remained steady, keeping the mansion orderly. But beneath the simplicity of her words, there was a subtle lesson. Life could continue, even after tragedy, if one allowed it. Chinidu listened, fascinated not just by her words, but by the calm strength in her voice, the quiet confidence in her demeanor. It was unlike anyone he had ever met, and the thought unsettled and excited him in equal measure. As the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the marble floors, a sense of peace settled over the mansion. The haunting presence that had once chilled the air was gone, replaced with something warmer, gentler. Chinidu realized he was laughing softly at something Ngozi had said, a sound that had been absent from the mansion for too long. In that moment, he understood that the mansion had healed alongside him, that grief could coexist with hope, and that life, even amidst tragedy, could offer moments of unexpected joy and connection. For Ngozi, sitting beside Chinidu, there was a quiet satisfaction in witnessing his first smile since Ifeoma's passing. She felt a delicate bond forming, not rushed, not forced, but a connection born of mutual trust, shared experience, and the subtle, guiding hand of the past. Somewhere deep within the mansion, a faint warmth seemed to settle in the corners, as if Ifeoma herself had approved, blessing the slow, tentative growth of something new, something gentle, and something capable of replacing sorrow with hope. By the time night fell, the mansion glowed under the soft light of lanterns and chandeliers. Lagos's city lights sparkled in the distance, a reflection of the life waiting beyond the gates. Chinidu and Ngozi remained on the veranda, watching as the first stars appeared. There were no words for a long moment, only a quiet understanding that the past had been acknowledged, the guilty punished, and that now, life could move forward. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that from grief and loss, a new beginning could emerge, delicate but unstoppable. The morning air was crisp and gentle, carrying the scent of wet earth and roses blooming in the Okoye gardens. For the first time in weeks, the mansion felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with wealth or grandeur. The oppressive weight of grief that had once clung to every corner had lifted, replaced by a quiet energy that spoke of healing, hope, and the possibility of life after tragedy. Sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off polished marble floors, and for Chinedu, even the familiar architecture seemed transformed, softer, more welcoming, more like home. Each action, arranging flowers, preparing meals, checking on the staff, was infused with a quiet authority that Chinedu found both grounding and inspiring. He watched her from the veranda as she tended to the roses Ifeoma had loved so dearly, noting the careful, delicate touch she used, the way her presence seemed to breathe life into the home itself. There was a serenity about her, a calm strength that contrasted beautifully with his own restless heart. Chinedu stepped closer, drawn not just by the rhythm of her movements, but by the energy she exuded, steady, reassuring, warm. "Ngozi," he said softly, careful not to startle her. I don't think I realized how much this house needed more than just care. It needed someone with a heart like yours." She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with calm understanding, and smiled gently. The sunlight caught in her hair, and for a fleeting moment, Chinedu forgot the weight of grief entirely. He simply felt the presence of someone who truly saw him, not as a billionaire, not as a grieving husband, but as a man beginning to heal. They spent the morning walking through the gardens together, speaking of small things at first, the way certain flowers needed extra water, the slow progress of the mansion's restoration, the mundane rhythms of life that somehow now carried new meaning. With each word, each shared glance, an unspoken bond deepened. There was no rush, no pressure, only the quiet emergence of trust, respect, and a subtle warmth that neither could yet name. Chinedu found himself laughing at her gentle teasing, the sound unfamiliar but intoxicating, a balm to a heart long weighed down by sorrow. By midday, they returned to the mansion's main hall, where sunlight poured through tall windows and painted the walls gold. Chinedu paused near the grand staircase, glancing at Ngozi. "I never thought, after everything, that I could feel anything like this again," he admitted, his voice low, honest, and hesitant. Ngozi tilted her head slightly, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Sir," she said gently, "healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes slowly, and sometimes it comes when we least expect it. You're ready for it now." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated in him, stirring emotions he had long buried beneath grief and duty. As the afternoon light shifted toward dusk, the mansion seemed to sigh in relief, the spaces once heavy with sorrow now filled with quiet laughter and easy conversation. Chinedu and Ngozi lingered in the veranda sipping tea and speaking of future plans, not the business empire or charitable projects, but small personal things. Meals to share, gardens to tend, and moments of peace they could carve out together. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every touch of hands across the table built something fragile yet undeniable, the first delicate stirrings of love amidst the ashes of grief. Outside, Lagos shimmered under the fading sun, unaware of the quiet transformation inside the Okoye mansion. Yet within its walls, the impossible had happened. Sorrow had been acknowledged, justice had been served, and two hearts, guided by courage, empathy, and shared experience, had begun to intertwine. Somewhere, faint and comforting, Ifeoma's spirit lingered, not in anger, not in grief, but as a blessing for the living, ensuring that love, trust, and happiness could finally take root. By nightfall, the mansion was calm, its halls echoing softly with the quiet rhythms of life returned. Chinedu and Ngozi sat together in the veranda, watching the city lights sparkle below, the faint scent of jasmine and roses filling the air. Words were few, but the silence was filled with promise. In that moment, the billionaire realized that he was no longer walking through life alone. And Ngozi, steadfast and brave, was no longer just a maid, but the beginning of something beautiful, tender, and entirely unexpected. The morning sun painted the Okoye mansion in warm shades of gold, spilling across the polished floors and illuminating the spaces that had long been shadowed by grief. The mansion no longer carried the weight of sorrow that had gripped it since Ifeoma's passing. Every corner seemed to breathe softly, carrying the lingering presence of her blessing rather than fear. The roses in the garden, once neglected during the months of mourning, now bloomed vibrantly under Ngozi's careful attention, their fragrance mingling with the faint scent of jasmine that had become a gentle reminder of love and hope. Chinidu walked quietly through the gardens, observing Ngozi tending to the roses with precision and care. Each movement she made was deliberate yet graceful, filled with quiet confidence. The billionaire, once hardened by loss and burdened by responsibility, felt a lightness in her presence, a calming, grounding effect he could not fully explain. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to simply watch, to breathe, and to feel a quiet warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with wealth or power. Ngozi looked up and caught his gaze. Her smile was soft, almost shy, yet full of strength. "Sir," she said, "the roses are thriving again. I think they've missed care and company." Chinidu laughed quietly, a sound that surprised him as much as it did her. He stepped closer, standing beside her, feeling the faint brush of her shoulder as they tended to the garden together. It was a simple act, yet profoundly comforting, a shared moment that bridged the gap between grief and hope, past and future. As they worked side by side, conversation flowed easily. Ngozi spoke of small joys, the rhythm of the gardens, the way the sunlight hit certain windows at dawn, the simple satisfaction of order returning to the mansion. Chinidu listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the steadiness of her presence. Each glance, each shared smile, strengthened the unspoken bond between them. There was a quiet understanding that grew with every shared task, a gentle recognition that they were no longer alone in navigating the aftermath of tragedy. By midday, they paused to rest under a large bougainvillea, its petals bright against the clear sky. Chinidu offered Ngozi a glass of water, and their fingers brushed as she accepted it. The contact was fleeting but electric, a subtle spark of connection neither had fully acknowledged but both felt. Chinidu cleared his throat, a little awkwardly, and said, "Ngozi, I don't know if I've ever properly told you how much I appreciate you. Not just for today, for everything. You've brought light back into this house, into me." Ngozi's eyes softened, and she replied quietly, "Sir, I only did what I thought was right. But I'm glad I could help. And I'm glad to be here." The mansion itself seemed to respond. The walls, once heavy with sorrow, now echoed only with the gentle rustle of leaves, the soft hum of distant city life, and the occasional chirp of birds returning to the gardens. Somewhere deep within the house, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth lingered, as if Ifeoma's spirit was watching, approving, and offering her blessing for the growing connection between Chinidu and Ngozi. The past was acknowledged, justice had been served, and a new chapter had begun. As the afternoon faded into evening, Chinidu and Ngozi lingered on the veranda, sipping tea and watching the city lights come alive below. Words were few, but the air was filled with understanding, comfort, and the subtle beginnings of something more. A quiet hand on a shoulder, a shared laugh, a glance held a fraction too long. Small gestures that hinted at the possibility of love, born not from obligation or circumstance, but from trust, courage, and shared experience. By nightfall, the mansion glowed softly in the golden lamplight, its halls echoing only with peace. Chinidu realized, perhaps for the first time in months, that he was ready to embrace life again, fully, openly, and with the heart capable of hope. And as he looked at Ngozi, he understood something profound. From sorrow, from tragedy, from the guidance of a spirit that refused to rest until justice was done, a new kind of happiness was beginning to take root, gentle, fragile, but undeniable. The morning sun filtered gently through the mansion's vast windows, reflecting gold and amber across the marble floors. Chinidu and Ngozi sat in the library, the air thick with quiet intimacy. Chinidu opened a photo album he had left untouched since Ifeoma's passing, the pages filled with smiles and memories. He hesitated, unsure if he could bear to relive the past. Ngozi gently placed her hand over his, reassuring him. "Sir, it's okay to remember her," she said softly. "She's part of your life, but she won't stop you from finding happiness again." As Chinidu turned the pages, he spoke softly of Ifeoma, her laughter, her gentle nature, her dreams for the city and the people. Ngozi listened intently, asking questions, remembering details, and offering insight, her presence a balm to his grief. With each story shared, a subtle connection deepened between them. Trust was being forged not in grand gestures, but in quiet understanding, in the willingness to sit with pain and not turn away. By afternoon, they ventured to the balcony, overlooking the busy streets of Lagos. Cars honked below, street vendors called out their wares, and children ran freely in small courtyards. Chinedu realized that life outside the mansion had continued while he remained trapped in sorrow. He turned to Ngozi, gratitude evident in his eyes. I didn't think I could ever feel this again, seeing life through someone else's eyes. It's healing. Ngozi smiled, a gentle blush coloring her cheeks. Sometimes, the right people help us see again, she replied, her voice almost a whisper. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the city in fiery shades of orange and red. They stood side by side in silence, comforted by each other's presence. Chinedu reached out, lightly brushing her hand. Tentative, exploratory, a spark of intimacy neither had expected but both felt deeply. It was a small gesture, yet it resonated with unspoken promise. Grief had given way to connection, sorrow had birthed hope, and hearts could begin to heal together. Over the next few days, Chinedu and Ngozi's companionship deepened. They shared meals on the veranda, tending to the gardens together, and even visiting the city market to procure fresh flowers and fruits for the mansion. The bustling streets of Lagos, once overwhelming and distant, now felt alive with possibility. Ngozi's familiarity with the city guided Chinedu, and he found joy in simple experiences he had long neglected. One afternoon, while walking through the market, Ngozi's laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained. Chinedu found himself laughing alongside her, a sound he hadn't realized he missed. People turned to look, noting the rare sight of the billionaire smiling genuinely. In that moment, Chinedu recognized that joy, though fragile, was returning, that life could offer beauty even after tragedy. As they walked back to the mansion, they carried baskets of fruit and flowers, their hands occasionally brushing. Each touch sparked a thrill neither could ignore. Chinedu realized he was drawn to her courage, her warmth, and the ease with which she navigated the world. Ngozi, for her part, noticed his subtle vulnerability, the layers beneath his polished exterior, and felt a tender connection growing in her heart. That evening, under the soft glow of lanterns, they shared stories of childhood, family, and dreams for the future. Chinedu spoke of ambitions that extended beyond wealth, helping the city, creating opportunities for the less fortunate. Ngozi shared memories of her modest upbringing, the struggles she faced, and her hope that one day she could make a difference. Together, they discovered shared values and visions, a foundation forming that went beyond companionship into something far more profound. The mansion itself seemed to heal alongside them. Where once the hallways echoed with sorrow, they now rang with soft laughter, music, and conversation. The gardens flourished, flowers blooming in colors more vibrant than before, reflecting the renewed life within the house. Even the servants, previously tense with fear, carried themselves with ease, inspired by the serenity Ngozi and Chinedu emanated. One morning, Chinedu found Ngozi arranging a bouquet of roses on the dining table. She paused, noticing him watching, and smiled. "It's a small thing, sir, but it makes the house feel alive again." He nodded, feeling an unexpected swell in his chest. "It does. You've done more than care for the house. You've cared for me, for all of us." The words lingered, heavy with gratitude, yet carrying an undercurrent of something deeper, unspoken but palpable. That evening, they dined together on the veranda, the city lights sparkling below them. For the first time in months, Chinedu felt present in the moment, unburdened by grief, free to laugh, share, and even tease Ngozi gently. She responded in kind, her laughter melodic, echoing into the gardens. The mansion's halls, once cold and oppressive, now resonated with warmth, a reflection of the slow but steady transformation of hearts within. The city of Lagos had settled into a soft hum beneath the velvet of night, distant traffic blending with the occasional call of street vendors finishing their day. The mansion, perched on its hill, seemed to glow faintly under the pale light of the moon. Shadows stretched lazily across the polished floors, but they no longer carried fear. Instead, they were witnesses to healing. Chinedu and Ngozi found themselves on the veranda, wrapped in quiet companionship, sipping tea that had grown lukewarm but comforting in the silence. Chinedu broke the stillness first, voice low and hesitant. "Ngozi, I never imagined I'd feel peace again. Not after everything." His gaze drifted over the city, lights twinkling like tiny lanterns in the distance, yet he found it impossible to look away from her face. There was a calm strength in her eyes, a quiet warmth that anchored him in ways he hadn't realized he needed. Ngozi's lips curved in a small, reassuring smile. "Sir, you've carried so much for so long. You're allowed to feel it now. Peace, and even happiness." She let the word hang between them. Happiness, a word that had been impossible in the mansion for months, now seeming tangible, almost daring to exist. The air between them grew heavy with unspoken emotion. Their hands brushed casually, lingering a moment longer than necessary. A shiver ran up Chinidu's spine, not from the cool night air, but from the closeness, from the subtle intimacy that had begun to form between them. Ngozi noticed his reaction and, without moving her hand away, looked down at the city lights. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the smallest touches tell the largest truths." Chinidu swallowed hard, his mind racing yet strangely calm. He wanted to reach for her, to confess the stirrings of a feeling he had long thought impossible, that perhaps, in this quiet companionship, something stronger than gratitude or friendship was blossoming. The mansion seemed to hold its breath with him, the faint scent of jasmine from the gardens below drifting toward them, as if blessing the moment. The night whispered promises of connection, of trust, and of love waiting just beyond fear. The following morning, the city was alive with the clamor of Lagos streets, motorbikes weaving through traffic, shopkeepers calling out prices, children laughing in the alleyways. Inside the mansion, the gardens had been transformed by Ngozi's diligent care. The roses bloomed brighter than ever, vibrant reds and soft pinks contrasting with the deep green of the foliage. Chinidu walked among them, noting how the space, once somber and oppressive, now radiated life. Ngozi was kneeling near a bed of roses, carefully trimming the stems. She looked up as Chinidu approached. "These will be ready for the veranda tea tonight," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. He smiled, genuinely, perhaps for the first time in months. "They're perfect, Ngozi, just like you," he said, surprising himself with the words. She blushed, quickly averting her eyes, and Chinidu realized the depth of the connection that had grown between them. Later, as they prepared tea together, a small accident occurred. A jar of sugar tipped over, spilling across the counter. Both of them bent to clean it up, their hands brushing repeatedly. Each touch sent a subtle charge through the air, electric yet tender. Laughter broke the moment. Ngozi's melodic, natural laugh, and Chinidu felt a warmth that went beyond physical proximity. It was trust, comfort, and the early stirrings of a bond neither could ignore. By the evening, they sat in the veranda, watching the city lights spark like fireflies. Chinidu spoke softly. "Ngozi, I never thought I'd feel this way again. Calm, alive, happy." She reached for his hand, this time deliberately, letting it rest in hers. "And you deserve it, sir. After all that's happened, you've earned a chance at life and love if you're ready to accept it." Their eyes met, the city's distant lights reflecting in both of their gazes, and for the first time, the mansion felt like a home in every sense, safe, warm, and full of possibility. The following week brought more shared moments. They spent mornings walking through the city streets, visiting local vendors, and helping the mansion staff with errands. Chinidu noticed the way Ngozi moved through Lagos with familiarity and grace, effortlessly navigating the chaos he had always taken for granted. Each moment together revealed more about her, her compassion, her quick mind, and the steady courage that had been tested during the nights of grief and haunting. One afternoon, sitting under the shade of a large bougainvillea in the gardens, Chinidu opened up. "I've been thinking about ways to honor Ifeoma's memory, about how to use this wealth for more than comfort. Schools, scholarships, programs for children." His voice faltered slightly, weighed by responsibility and hope. Ngozi nodded, her eyes reflecting both admiration and understanding. "I've always wanted to help children in my old neighborhood, create programs for girls, teach them skills, give them opportunities. Maybe we could do it together." The idea sparked a new excitement in Chinidu. "Yes, together," he agreed. It wasn't just about philanthropy, it was about connection, shared purpose, and discovering joy in building a future that mattered. The afternoon sunlight bathed them in gold, and for the first time, they laughed at small, unimportant things, delighting in a world that had once seemed too heavy for laughter. That night, the mansion settled into a calm serenity. Lagos's city lights twinkled below, a soft chorus of distant horns and street chatter carrying faintly through the gardens. Chinedu wandered to the garden where Ngozi was tending roses under the soft glow of lanterns. He stood silently, watching her for a long moment, noticing the concentration on her face and the way the moonlight played across her features. Finally, he spoke, voice low, hesitant. Ngozi, I've come to realize something. I depend on you more than I expected. You're essential to my life now. She paused, heart pounding, and slowly turned to face him. The moonlight caught her eyes, glinting with unshed tears. Sir, I feel the same. Being here with you, it matters to me. More than I thought possible. The words lingered between them like a delicate promise. The garden, the mansion, the city below, all seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, they allowed themselves to acknowledge the stirrings of love. It was tentative, fragile, yet powerful, born from shared grief, trust, and quiet companionship. In the days that followed, the mansion echoed with small, intimate moments. Breakfast shared in the gardens, walks through sunlit streets, quiet evenings by the veranda. Each moment strengthened the bond between them. Chinedu began to look forward to her presence not only for comfort, but for joy. Ngozi, too, noticed how his laughter had returned, how his grief had softened into something warm and tender. One evening, as they organized the mansion's library together, Chinedu accidentally brushed his shoulder against hers. Instead of moving away, she smiled faintly and met his gaze. That small touch lingered in both of their hearts, a quiet acknowledgement that what had started as companionship was becoming something far deeper. The mansion was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, the city lights below twinkling like stars. Chinedu and Ngozi sat together on the veranda, sipping tea and sharing small stories of their childhood, their dreams, and fears. The air between them hummed with unspoken tension, a delicate mixture of curiosity, comfort, and attraction. Chinedu reached for her hand, this time without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined naturally, the warmth of her hand anchoring him. Ngozi, he began, voice low and hesitant. I think I'm ready to allow myself to feel again. With you. Ngozi's smile was gentle, reassuring, and full of promise. Sir, I've been feeling the same, and I think we can face the future together. The night air carried a soft scent of roses, and somewhere deep in the mansion, a faint warmth lingered, as if Ifeoma's spirit had finally given her blessing for the love that was beginning to bloom. For the first time in months, both felt alive, free from grief, fear, and sorrow, ready to embrace hope, connection, and the first true stirrings of love. The sun rose over Lagos in a blaze of gold and pink, spilling warmth across the city streets and illuminating the Okoye mansion. Chinedu and Ngozi were already up, preparing breakfast together in the grand kitchen. The smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of roses from the veranda. Laughter echoed through the mansion, light, spontaneous, and entirely unfamiliar to the once somber halls. Chinedu poured tea into delicate cups while Ngozi arranged plates of fruit. They moved in perfect, unspoken harmony, their gestures small but intimate, each one carrying subtle undertones of growing affection. You've made this house feel alive again, Chinedu murmured as he handed her a cup. Ngozi smiled softly. And you've allowed it to breathe again, she replied, her eyes glinting with warmth. After breakfast, they walked through the gardens, discussing the roses, the fountains, and the small repairs that Ngozi had initiated. Their conversation drifted from mundane tasks to childhood memories, revealing vulnerabilities, hopes, and dreams. For Chinedu, the sound of her laughter and the softness in her gaze were almost intoxicating. For Ngozi, his gentle attention and sincerity stirred feelings she had long tried to suppress. By evening, they sat on the veranda again, the city stretching out below them in a glittering panorama of lights. Chinedu reached for her hand again, lingering slightly longer than before. Ngozi, I feel alive again, he whispered. She squeezed his hand gently, a blush rising to her cheeks. And I feel safe with you, she said, her voice soft but confident. Outside, the city thrummed with life, oblivious to the quiet love blooming atop its hills. Over the next few days, the mansion became a place of trust and shared confidences. One afternoon, as they walked along the veranda, Ngozi spoke of her childhood in a small Lagos neighborhood. She told stories of struggles, hardships, and the dreams she had carried silently for years. Chinedu listened intently, absorbing every detail, marveling at her resilience and compassion. "You've been through so much," he said quietly, his voice heavy with admiration. "And yet, you're so strong." Ngozi's eyes softened, and she reached for his hand. "And yet, I feel stronger with you by my side," she replied. Chinedu's heart ached with a mixture of longing and tenderness. He realized that the walls he had built around his heart for grief were beginning to crumble, brick by brick. That evening, they shared stories from their youth, laughing at silly mistakes and marveling at coincidences that had shaped their lives. The mansion, once a fortress of sorrow, now resonated with warmth, music, and light conversation. The roses Ngozi tended seemed brighter, the city below twinkled more vividly, and the air itself felt charged with the electricity of budding love. One night, Lagos was hit by a sudden downpour. Rain lashed against the windows, drumming rhythmically on the roof, and the mansion seemed to cocoon them from the city's chaos. Chinedu and Ngozi found themselves sitting on the veranda, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping hot chocolate. The storm created an intimacy neither could ignore. "Rain always reminds me of new beginnings," Ngozi said softly, gazing at the glistening city. Chinedu turned to her, voice low, filled with unspoken emotion. "With you, every day feels like a new beginning." She smiled, a tear threatening to fall, and reached for his hand. In that simple act, the mansion seemed to exhale, the ghosts of grief fading completely. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside, emotions rising, fear dissolving, love beginning to root itself firmly. Chinedu and Ngozi decided to explore Lagos together. They walked along the busy streets, mingling with the vendors, feeling the pulse of the city beneath their feet. Ngozi guided Chinedu through neighborhoods he had never taken the time to understand. They bought street food, sampled fresh fruits, and laughed at the chaos around them. In that crowd, Chinedu realized that happiness was not something one could buy or command. It was a presence, a feeling that needed to be nurtured, and he had found it in Ngozi. When a child approached to ask for a coin, Ngozi handed him one with a smile. Chinedu watched her, deeply moved. "You have a heart for people," he whispered. "You remind me of what I've been missing." Their eyes met, a subtle spark passing between them amidst the city's life, signaling the growing intimacy that neither could ignore. That night, on the veranda, Chinedu finally spoke what had been growing in his heart for weeks. "Ngozi, I can't stop thinking about you. About us. I think I love you." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth and vulnerability. Ngozi's eyes glistened, tears forming, and she whispered back, "Chinedu, I love you too. I've been afraid to say it. Afraid it was too soon." They sat in silence for a long while, hands intertwined, listening to the distant hum of Lagos below. Somewhere deep in the mansion, a gentle warmth seemed to settle, as if Ifeoma's spirit had watched, finally at peace, allowing this new love to flourish. The following days were filled with quiet domesticity, preparing meals together, tending the garden, decorating the mansion for a small gathering, and sharing stolen glances that spoke volumes. Every corner of the mansion reflected life, laughter in the halls, music in the drawing room, flowers in every room. Chinedu and Ngozi's love grew with each shared task, each conversation, each moment of tenderness. The mansion no longer bore the weight of grief, it was alive with hope. And in their small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a shared smile, a gentle kiss on the back of the hand, they found joy in the simplicity of being together. The mansion hosted a small gathering of close friends and family. Chinedu and Ngozi stood side by side, their connection visible to all. Guests commented on the change in the mansion, the laughter, and the obvious affection between the two. Chinedu realized that love was not just an internal feeling, but something that radiated outward, transforming not only the mansion but the people around them. Ngozi's family visited briefly, and she introduced Chinedu with pride and ease. Their respect and admiration for each other grew, solidifying their bond in the eyes of those who mattered most. The mansion echoed with joy, the city humming softly beyond its walls, and the couple felt the first taste of life fully lived together. One evening, Chinedu surprised Ngozi with a private dinner on the veranda. Lanterns flickered softly, roses surrounded them, and the city sparkled below like a sea of stars. Ngozi, Chinedu said, his voice trembling with emotion, I want to build a life with you. Not just moments, not just days, a future together. Tears welled in Ngozi's eyes as she whispered, I want that too, more than anything. They shared a long, tender kiss under the lantern light, the city lights twinkling in harmony with their hearts. The mansion, the city, the gardens, all bore witness to the beginning of their life together. Late that night, as the couple sat hand in hand, a soft, warm glow filled the veranda. The faint, ethereal form of Iphioma appeared briefly, smiling gently. I see love in your hearts, her voice echoed softly. I am at peace knowing you have found happiness. Chinedu and Ngozi looked at each other, understanding the blessing and feeling a profound sense of closure. The mansion, once haunted, now radiated peace, approval, and hope. With the blessing of the past acknowledged, the mansion fully alive, and the city sprawling beneath them, Chinedu and Ngozi embraced their love openly. They laughed, shared dreams, and planned a future together, no longer haunted by grief or fear. Lagos, vibrant and unyielding, became the backdrop of their story, the city's heartbeat echoing the rhythm of their hearts. The billionaire and the maid, once separated by circumstance, now stood side by side in a life reborn, ready to face the world together. Love, trust, and hope had triumphed, and the mansion, a symbol of sorrow, justice, and healing, became the home where their happiness truly began. The morning sun poured through the mansion windows, illuminating the halls now filled with flowers, ribbons, and the soft hum of excitement. Chinedu moved through the rooms, checking details, though his mind kept wandering to Ngozi. She moved with quiet efficiency, overseeing decorations and helping staff with final arrangements, her calm presence balancing his nervous energy. I can't believe this is finally happening, Chinedu said, trying to sound casual but failing. Ngozi laughed softly, a sound like wind through the roses. We've worked for this moment quietly for months, she replied, eyes sparkling with anticipation. Now it's time to share it with the world. The mansion was alive with activity. Lagos vendors delivered vibrant decorations, chefs prepared lavish meals, and the gardens were transformed into a venue worthy of the union. Yet amidst the grandeur, Chinedu's attention never left Ngozi. Every glance, every shared smile, was a reminder of the long journey from grief, fear, and loss to love, trust, and hope. By mid-afternoon, the mansion's gates opened to welcome friends and family. Relatives from both sides arrived, marveling at the transformation of the mansion, the lush gardens, and the evident happiness radiating from the couple. Laughter, greetings, and joyous chatter filled the air, mingling with the scent of fresh roses and the distant hum of Lagos streets. Ngozi's family hugged her tightly, pride and joy evident in their eyes. We've watched you grow strong and brave, her mother said, tears glistening. And now, you found someone who truly cherishes you. Chinedu's parents nodded approvingly, their stern exteriors softened by emotion. You have made our son truly happy, his mother whispered. The mansion's grand hall was alive with preparation. Musicians tuned instruments, servers arranged dishes, and every detail reflected months of careful planning. Yet, even amidst the chaos, Chinedu and Ngozi found moments alone, brushing hands, shared laughter, and quiet words that only they could hear, savoring the intimacy before the public ceremony began. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the mansion gardens, the ceremony began. Guests lined the flowered path, whispers of admiration and joy floating through the air. Ngozi walked gracefully toward Chinedu, every step confident, radiant, and alive with happiness. Chinedu felt his chest tighten at the sight of her, the maid who had healed the mansion, himself, and their hearts, now walking toward him as his future wife. The officiant spoke words of love, commitment, and hope, and the couple exchanged vows that carried the weight of past grief, the promise of the present, and the hope of a shared future. I promise to honor, respect, and cherish you, Chinedu said, voice rich with emotion. Ngozi's eyes glistened as she replied, I promise to stand by you, share your dreams, and love you endlessly. Guests applauded, some wiping tears, as the couple sealed their vows with a tender kiss. The mansion, gardens, and city lights bore witness to a love born from tragedy, but strengthened through courage, trust, and unwavering companionship. The reception was alive with music, dancing, and joy. Lagos streets outside the mansion echoed faintly with distant drums and laughter from passing celebrations, mirroring the energy inside. Chinedu and Ngozi moved through the guests, exchanging hugs, handshakes, and smiles. Children ran through the gardens, laughter ringing clear, as if blessing the newlyweds with innocence and joy. They shared their first dance under the soft glow of lanterns, holding each other close as music played softly. I never imagined life could feel this full, Chinedu whispered. Ngozi rested her head on his shoulder. And I never imagined love could be this gentle, yet so powerful. Their dance was a symbol not only of love but of triumph, over grief, deceit, and fear, culminating in a life reborn. Night fully settled over Lagos, the city lights sparkling like a reflection of the stars above. Chinedu and Ngozi stood hand in hand on the veranda, overlooking the mansion gardens, the city, and the life they had built together. Somewhere in the corners of the mansion, a faint warmth lingered. Ifeoma's spirit, finally at peace, had given her blessing, ensuring that love could flourish without fear or sorrow. Chinedu turned to Ngozi, eyes full of love and gratitude. We've come a long way, haven't we? He said softly. She smiled, resting her hand on his chest. Yes, but this is just the beginning. Our life starts now. The mansion, once a place of grief and haunting, now shone with hope, laughter, and love. The billionaire and the maid, once bound by circumstance and tragedy, now stood together, partners, companions, and soulmates, ready to face the world as one. And Lagos, sprawling and alive beneath them, carried on unaware of the quiet miracle that had taken place atop its hills. Two hearts, healed by trust and love, beginning a life of happiness together forever. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment for more videos.